You think you know what's waiting for you in the dark until the dark moves. Trespassing is supposed to be harmless, a thrill, a dare, a peek at what's left behind. But sometimes the place you sneak into isn't abandoned at all. These aren't just stories. They're true accounts from people who went somewhere they shouldn't have and came back different. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where there wasn't much to do after dark. By the time I was 17, I'd seen every movie, sat in every diner booth, and driven every back road within 30 miles. That's probably why I said yes when my friend Mason suggested we go check out the old grain farm by Route 19. The place had been shut down for decades. The silos still stood huge, rusting cylinders visible from the highway, and the main barn had collapsed years ago. The only way in was through a section of fencing that had fallen, leaving a gap big enough to squeeze through. It was about 10 p.m. when we parked in the turnout and killed the headlights. The night air was heavy with that humid summer smell of cut grass and dirt. I remember hearing crickets, a lot of them, until we stepped through the fence. Then it went dead quiet. We walked across the gravel toward the silos. Up close, they were massive, towering maybe 60, 70 feet high. The metal was scarred with rust streaks, and the access ladders were warped in places. Mason spotted one with the hatch slightly open at the base. "Bet there's nothing in there," he said, crouching down to peek inside. It was pitch black past the hatch, and the smell hit us immediately damp, musty, almost like wet cardboard. We climbed inside, crouching low until the space opened up. Our flashlights cut through swirls of dust, catching bits of old grain rotting on the floor. The curved walls made every sound bounce around, even our own breathing sounded too loud. At first, it was just a big, empty echo chamber. Then Mason froze. "You hear that?" he whispered. I killed my light and stood still. At first, I thought it was just the ringing in my ears, but then I heard a faint scraping sound coming from higher up inside the silo, like something shifting against metal. We both pointed our lights up. About 30 feet above us was the secondary access hatch, the one used for loading grain. The beam caught something, not movement exactly, but a shape. A human shape. Someone was lying flat across the metal support beam up there, face down, looking right at us. I didn't even process it fully before the scraping started again, this time closer. Whoever it was, they were sliding down toward us. "Go," I said, my voice breaking. We scrambled for the hatch we'd come in through, Mason pushing me ahead. Behind us, the metal clanged as whoever was up there dropped onto the floor. I didn't turn around, just kept crawling through the hatch and into the open night air. We ran across the gravel, toward the fence, the silence of the place somehow worse than if there'd been shouting or footsteps. When we finally reached the car, Mason turned to look back. I wish he hadn't, because I still see his expression in my head, wide eyes, open mouth. "There's someone standing in the hatch," he whispered. I looked, and yeah, there was. Just standing there, half in shadow, watching us. They didn't move until Mason started the engine. Then they stepped back inside. We never went back. And the weirdest part? A month later, the hatch we'd used to get in was welded shut. But when I drove past, I swear I still saw a shadow in one of the silo windows. I've always had this fascination with tall, abandoned structures. Maybe it's the view. Maybe it's the adrenaline of climbing something you're not supposed to. But the old water tower on the edge of Braxton was the ultimate temptation. It stood alone in a clearing, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The paint was peeling, revealing dull steel beneath, and the ladder ran straight up the side, disappearing into a circular tank that had been dry for decades. Everyone in town said the ladder was rusted through, and the hatch was welded shut. But on that humid August night, standing in the overgrown lot with my flashlight, I could see the truth. The hatch wasn't sealed. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Trespassing alone is stupid, I know, but I wanted the experience to be mine. I slipped through a gap in the fence, the metal groaning softly as it flexed. My boots crunched on gravel until I reached the base of the tower. The ladder was rough under my hands, bits of rust flaking off with every movement. My flashlight dangled from my wrist on a strap as I climbed, the metal creaking under my weight. The higher I got, the more the ground below dissolved into shadow. By the time I reached the hatch, my palms were slick with sweat. I shoved it open with my shoulder and crawled inside. The air was stifling. Even without water, the tank smelled of mildew and rust. My light swept across the curved walls, catching decades of graffiti names, dates, crude drawings, but no sign that anyone had been here recently. That's when I heard it. At first it sounded like a drip. One single drop of water hitting metal, then another and another. But the more I listened, the less it sounded like water. It was too irregular, too deliberate. The sound was coming from above me, which made no sense. There was no above in a water tower, just the domed roof. I tilted the flashlight upward, and that's when I saw it, or at least the suggestion of it. Something was clinging to the interior wall near the ceiling. Not a person exactly, the proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, torso too short. It moved when the light hit it, not away from me, but sideways, along the wall, like a spider. The dripping sound started again, faster now, echoing through the chamber. My first instinct was to climb back out, but the hatch seemed impossibly far. My second instinct was worse, to keep watching, because I realized the sound wasn't just random, it was tapping. 3 slow taps. Pause. 3 slow taps again. And then it started descending. The thing didn't climb down like a person. It crawled, its hands or claws gripping the rivets in the wall as it spiraled lower. My light caught a pale, expressionless face, but the eyes they reflected like an animal's. I finally moved, scrambled to the hatch, nearly slipping twice on the rust-slick ladder. I didn't even close it behind me, just clambered down, metal groaning with every step. When I reached the ground, my legs gave out. I lay there in the grass, staring up at the hatch. I thought I was imagining it when I saw movement, but no, something pale and elongated was peering out, watching me from above. The tapping started again. This time, it was on the outside of the tank. I didn't go back for my flashlight. I didn't even look over my shoulder until I was back in my car, the fence rattling as I sped away. I never used to think much about what was out in the woods behind my town. We had trails, creeks, the usual rural nothingness. But if you went deep enough, you'd eventually come across something strange, a fenced-off square of land with crumbling brick buildings and a tangle of power lines overhead. It was the old Clearbrook electrical substation, shut down in the Latte 70s after a fire. Nobody went near it officially, but I had friends who thought exploring abandoned places was the ultimate weekend thrill. That night there were 4 of us, me, Tyler, Jess, and Mark. We parked a good half-mile away, so no one would hear the car, then hiked in through the trees. It was one of those warm, windless nights where the air feels heavy, like it's holding something back. The fence around the substation was rusted and leaning, easy enough to crawl under. Inside, Weeds grew waist-high, and the buildings looked worse than I remembered. Windows broken, bricks blackened from the fire. We split up without much discussion, each drawn to a different building. I headed toward the main hall, the one with tall arched windows. My flashlight beam caught the inside bare walls, scorch marks, and the skeletal remains of some old transformers. Tyler called from outside. "You guys gotta see this." We followed his voice to the far corner of the lot, where a small, windowless brick structure sat half buried in the ground. The metal door was hanging by one hinge. Inside was a narrow stairwell leading down. We were laughing, shoving each other a bit, pretending not to be creeped out. But the deeper we went, the quieter everyone got. The room at the bottom was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with a low ceiling and concrete walls. There was nothing in it except for a large circle drawn in something black, surrounded by strange symbols. Mark crouched down, running his fingers over the markings. "Paint," he said. "Or maybe not." That's when we noticed the smell, sweet and metallic, almost like rotting fruit. Jess muttered, "Okay, I don't like this," and turned toward the stairs. We heard footsteps. Not from the stairs, but from somewhere deeper. A sound like heavy boots scraping across concrete. We froze, listening, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then a voice, low and hoarse. "You're not supposed to be here." Every hair on my arms stood up. The sound didn't echo like ours did. It was as if the speaker was right next to us, but in complete darkness. Tyler swung his flashlight toward the far wall, and there was a doorway we hadn't noticed before, almost completely black inside. The light didn't penetrate more than a few feet. Something shifted in that doorway. I can't describe it well, just the outline of a person, but wrong. Shoulders too wide, head tilted at an unnatural angle. It stepped forward, and the symbols on the floor seemed to shimmer, almost like heat rising off pavement. Jess bolted up the stairs, and the rest of us followed without speaking. I swear, I felt breath on my neck as I climbed. When I reached the top and turned back, the room was empty, but the doorway was still there. We didn't talk much on the way back to the car. Nobody wanted to be the one to say what we all saw. But a week later, Tyler's little sister found a piece of paper on their front porch. It had one of the symbols from the floor drawn on it. And underneath, in blocky handwriting, "I told you not to come back." I've worked in building demolition for years, so I've seen my fair share of creepy old structures. But the one place that's stuck in my mind isn't even one I was hired to tear down. It was a condemned hospital on the edge of a small town we were working near. The place had been shut since the early 2000s, after a major flood from the nearby river damaged the lower floors. No one ever repaired it, too expensive, too far gone. Locals said the bottom level was still under a few feet of water. One night, after our crew wrapped early, I decided to check it out. Dumb, I know, but I'd heard stories from guys in town about strange lights in the windows at night. I parked behind the old ambulance bay and used a side entrance where the doors had been ripped off long ago. Inside, it smelled like mold and something faintly sour, like stagnant water. The first 2 floors were what you'd expect: peeling paint, debris everywhere, scattered hospital beds, broken glass crunching under my boots. My flashlight beam danced across old patient charts still pinned to walls. Halfway down a hallway, I found the stairwell to the basement. A heavy metal door stood ajar, with water damage creeping up the walls. I stepped inside, and the air instantly turned cold. My flashlight caught the water at the bottom murky, still reflecting the light in strange, broken patterns. It looked maybe 3 feet deep. I could have turned back, should have. But I pulled out a small folding chair I'd found earlier and used it to step down into the water. It was freezing, soaking through my boots instantly. The sound changed as soon as I was knee-deep. The building's groans and drips faded under the muffled lap of water against the walls. I waded forward, passing old wheelchairs half submerged, their handles just barely breaking the surface. My light caught faded paint on the wall, Ward C in blocky letters. The corridor ended in a set of double doors, both swollen from water damage, but still barely open. I pushed through, and the room beyond was bigger, maybe a common area. That's when I heard it. A splash. Not mine. I froze, scanning the water. Something rippled near the far corner, where the light didn't quite reach. I told myself it was debris shifting. Then I saw movement, a pale shape just under the surface, drifting slowly. It sank out of sight before I could focus. My brain screamed to leave, but I waded deeper without thinking, shining my light into every shadow. The water rippled again, this time much closer. And then a face broke the surface. It was only there for a second, eyes clouded white, skin waxy and bloated before it vanished back into the water without a sound. I backed toward the doors, my hands shaking, and something brushed against my leg. Not a soft bump, a deliberate, sliding touch from ankle to knee. That's when I ran. I didn't care about the noise, didn't care that I could barely see through my splashing. I hit the stairwell and kept going until I was outside, gasping in the night air. The water in that wing has probably been there for decades. There's no way anything alive should be down there. But sometimes, when I drive past the hospital late at night, I swear I see ripples in the darkened basement windows, like something is still moving beneath the surface, waiting.